Hi, everyone. The Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So, I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part. And then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today's video is January Prophecy Update Days of Darkness. So, this would be like the first half of January because I'm recording this on January 17th. Okay, so to start out the year, the YouTube prophets were doing 2025 reviews, and then they were talking about what they think is coming in 2026. Okay, so I actually saw one video that said 26 reasons why the rapture will not be in 2026, and that was from the End Time Channel YouTube channel. Um, um, and so, what the prophets are saying is they say that right now we're living in a time where there's no temple, no Antichrist, and no Babylon. Okay, so first off, you know that I'm not looking for the rapture. As it's traditionally taught, I'm looking for the return of Jesus. Because I think there's problems with the rapture teaching, and if you are interested in that, you could look at some of my previous videos. And then, so they say no temple, no Antichrist, no Babylon. So I disagree with all three of those, and actually think all of those are in our time frame right now, and we'll talk about those. Okay, so I wanted to bring this verse from the book of Haggai. It says, okay, thus says the Lord of hosts. This people says, the time has not come, even the time for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. Then the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies desolate? So people are saying it's not time, like basically for the Messianic kingdom, because I believe that when Jesus comes back is when the third temple is going to be built. Okay, and so then here's another verse from Ezekiel 12. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, what is this proverb you people have concerning the land of Israel, saying, the days are long and every vision fails? Therefore say to them, thus says the Lord God, I will make this proverb cease so that they will no longer use it as a proverb in Israel. But tell them the days draw near as well as the fulfillment of every vision. For there will no longer be any false vision or flattering divination within the house of Israel. For I, the Lord, will speak, and whatever word I speak will be performed. It will no longer be delayed, for in your days, O rebellious house, I will speak the word and perform it, declares the Lord God. Furthermore, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, behold, the house of Israel is saying, the vision that he sees is for many years from now, and he prophesies of times far off. Therefore say to them, thus says the Lord, none of my words will be delayed any longer. Whatever word I speak will be performed, declares the Lord God. So I think that these verses are very timely, because I do think everybody thinks all the prophecies of the last days are for many years from now. Some people think 2030, some people think another 100 years. And so people do not believe that we're living in the last days. And it's true that we've been waiting for a long time for God's promises to happen. But I believe that really, if you've been paying attention to what's been going on during, it's basically the last 17 years, and we'll talk about that. You will be aware that God has had us all in this time frame of preparing us for the return of the Messiah. And I do believe that we're nearing the end of this time frame, that everything that was supposed to happen before Jesus came back has pretty much happened. I mean, there might be a few, one or two things, but I think we're definitely, um, the return of Jesus is definitely imminent. Um, okay. So then, let's see. So from Daniel 7, we read about the fourth beast, okay? And it says, I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed. So the 2 sets of verses that I have on this slide, I highlighted 2 phrases. One is wear down the saints, and the other one is shattering the power of the holy people. And so I was wondering if you felt like the saints of God have been worn down, and if you feel like the power of the holy people has been shattered. Anyways, and so I kind of have these written in my notebook, and I have them highlighted because they're kind of things that I look at to think about, like, has this been accomplished? Are we, do we see the fulfillment of these in our day? And I really think we have. I definitely think God's people are worn down. And especially like this last year of Trump has been very draining and very wearing on us, people. Like, it just seems like craziness what's been going on. And then the phrase too about shattering the power of the holy people, I think that could also really connect to how, especially with Trump's latest like ceasefire, like the term that someone came up with was, they called it the deal, quote unquote, deal of the millennium. With this latest ceasefire, basically it is Trump trying to keep Israel from really just being free to fight this war the way that they want to fight it in Israel. And we've talked about that in previous videos too, because we had the same problem with Biden, where Biden was constantly trying to get Israel to stop doing things. And so Trump is no different than Biden in terms of Israel, just repeating a lot of the same behavior. And I really think, okay, so this fourth beast, I definitely think is the Antichrist, and I definitely think the Antichrist is Trump. And so it's interesting that it talks about it, the fourth beast devouring the whole earth. So I believe that earth is a prophetical shadow, a prophetical term used for America. Like, America is earth and Israel is the heavens. And so then it says, we'll tread it down and crush it. And so what's interesting is that this horn comes, let's see, where is that phrase? He will be different from the previous ones and subdue 3 kings. So I was trying to figure out what those 3 kings could be. And so remember, kings are a picture of authority. Crowns represent authority. I think the horns too represent authority. And so what my theory on that is that it has to do with the 3 branches of of America, the three, what do you call them, the three branches of the American government, the judicial, legislative, and I can't remember what the third one is, but that is really what Trump has done, is that he's subdued all the different branches. Okay, so he's really come to power, and he's really doing his own thing, and he's not working with Congress like previous presidents have. Like, the government really has been set up. He's not doing that. And and for the most part, well, and so it's interesting too with the courts, because he's either working with the courts if they're working with him, or he's working against the courts if they're working against him. And then, really, as being a president, he's not acting like a president. He's acting like a dictator, or like king of the world or whatever. So I believe we're in that fourth kingdom. And then, okay, so then from Daniel 12, it says, Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others were standing, one on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, How long will it be until the end of these wonders? I heard that man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. Okay, so there's a connection with both sets of these verses to the time, times, and half a time. And I missed two in the verse set of verses. I highlighted 26, because I think that connects to 2026, because it says, But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. And so there's this whole story about the right and the left. And, so we see in this country how it's really been kind of this simmering civil war between the right and the left for probably ever since Obama's days. Okay. And so I really think we have fulfilled the story of, Daniel talks about going back and forth. And I think going back and forth is like going back and forth between the left and the right. And so we were left under Obama, and then we went right with Trump. And then we were left with Biden, and then we went right again with Trump. And so that's why I really think we're in the last of the last days, because we've done that back and forth twice. Okay. And I'll show you another verse that talks about that. And then and then it says, as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people. So one of the connections I made is that in another chapter in Daniel, it talks about the feet of the statue. So I definitely think we're in the feet of the statue, which means the end of the statue. And then what happens is a rock gets cut out of the mountain and smashes the statue. And it talks about the feet being made of two types of material, and it could actually be three types of material, because it's like miry clay and then iron. Okay, and they don't mix. Okay, but I'm thinking the miry clay is like wet clay, and so the wet could connect to so I think the water and rivers and things like that connect to the left. And then I think Trump and Netanyahu are the legs of iron, and because they definitely rule with an iron hand. Okay. And so then the clay, and so we know all throughout the scripture that God uses clay to represent his people. Okay. And so this phrase, shattering the power of the holy people, makes us think about broken clay vessels. Okay. And so basically, um, for the last 17 years, basically, God's been wearing us down and causing the world to break us down, because then he's going to resurrect us, okay, when Jesus returns. He's going to fix the clay vessels, okay? Um, so that's those verses, okay? Um, and then I actually had someone made a comment on one of my videos, and they said they didn't think the last days are here because there hasn't been a falling away. Okay. Well, so we know about the falling away from Second Thessalonians. It says, "Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter as if from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God." So I highlighted the phrase about, "for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first." Okay. Well, so if you've really been paying attention, I think one of the biggest apostasies was during the time of Obama, because America was really a strong Christian country. And then all of a sudden during the time of Obama, it wasn't good to be a Christian. And Christianity was really oppressed during that time. And it wasn't really good to talk about Christian things. But then another apostasy that I saw too was during the first time of Trump. And so I actually saw, like, the big falling away during the first time of Trump would have been like the conservatives, because all of a sudden, like the conservative people that I used to listen to kind of went nuts. And like I couldn't listen to them anymore, like on the radio and stuff like that. And so I really connect that to the delusions. Like God talks about he's going to put delusions on people in the last days. And I really saw that strongly during the time of Trump. I mean, I do believe there's delusions. There's a deluding influence with the people on the left, and that Obama was a big part of that. But I probably saw it more happen during the time of Trump. And so, because during the time of Trump, we saw people, they were believing that like the election was stolen, and they were believing that the vaccine changes your DNA. And there was just a lot of conspiracy theories that all of a sudden, like, mainstream people were like talking about and believing. So that was definitely an apostasy going on there. And I really think it had a lot to do with a lot of people falling away from Jesus and following Trump as their Messiah. And then right before the 2024 Republican National Committee, this is another apostasy that I think of. The Republican Party was they dropped their abortion views, like their anti-abortion views, okay, and then they really kind of stopped being conservative, and it really became like the Trump Party. They call them Trumplicans instead of Republicans. So that was a big falling away too. And then I put in here the three horns falling, the three branches of the U.S. government. Okay, like now during the time of the second term of Trump. Okay. And so for all those people that are saying, okay, for first off, for all those people that are saying the temple's not here. Okay, so I disagree with that because I believe America is a type of temple and Israel is a type of temple. Okay, that the nations themselves are a type of temple. Okay, like in a metaphorical sense. Because and because America was a very strong Christian country, and we sent out missionaries. And so, if a temple is a place where you worship God, and then you send out missionaries, that was definitely America. Okay, um, and then the same thing with Israel in terms of, um, being a Jewish nation. Um, and so like, um, I actually don't know. I might have talked about this before. I think I did hear about this recently, that Israel did send out a bunch of Jewish missionaries. Anyways, so I believe both of them to be the current temples in our day. And so we don't have to wait for an actual physical temple to be built. And if you understand the story of Israel, how they were 12 tribes, and at some point there was a civil war in the nation of Israel, and it got divided into, it was like 9.5 tribes versus 3.5 tribes. And it was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Okay. And really what they talk about now is that the 10 tribes are considered to be the lost, that nobody knows who they are, where they are. Okay, nobody knows who they are, nobody knows where they are. Okay, but I really believe the church is those missing 10 tribes. Okay, and the Jewish people don't recognize it because of their their history with the church, basically. And then I think anti-Semitism in the church causes people to not recognize that we're part of Israel. Okay. Um, so that's the story. And so then if you understand that there's a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, like, it's really interesting because here in America, we're like part of North America. I think America really became the capital of the northern kingdom. Okay, that the history of America is about God fulfilling a lot of his promises to Abraham through like the pilgrims coming here and settling um in this country, and just the whole founding of this nation. Okay, and then Israel would be the southern kingdom. And like, it's easier for us since Israel became a nation in 1948. It's easier for us to kind of see God's work in that country. Okay, but I think we definitely lost that concept of God working in America. And a lot of that had to do with during the time of Obama. It's like, instead of America being a Christian country, it's like they were calling America occupiers. Okay, and then the whole concept of like, a melting pot in America became taboo, and everyone wanted to get back to talking about the different, nationalities in this country. So we lost a lot of that stuff during the time of Obama. Anyways, so that would be the temple. Okay, looking for the temple. So then what you're looking for is somebody sitting in America or sitting in Israel saying, what does he say? I am God, displaying himself as being God. And I definitely think Trump fits the bill. Okay. He really acts like he's king of the world. And then the people that say there's no Babylon right now, like, so so a lot of people think we have to wait for Babylon to be rebuilt, like the Babylon that used to be in Iraq, I guess, is what they're looking for. so I don't know. I really honestly don't know why they can't look at America and see, oh my gosh, America is fulfilling so many of the Babylon prophecies. Okay. And so I have this picture of Trump with the Saudi prince. Okay. And you can see in the background, well, first of all, they're sitting on gold colored chairs, and you could see the gold, so Trump had like covered the White House with these gold accents. Okay. Really acting like a king. Okay. Really acting like, um, like he's from Babylon, basically. And then the picture on the right hand side is the dinner that they had when the Saudi prince came, and they were all eating on these gold rim plates. Okay. So definitely see a big, strong picture of Babylon. And then, and then I put this Antichrist here because I definitely think Trump is the Antichrist. Okay. Um, I think he's one in a series of Antichrist. I mean, I think he's the final Antichrist. I mean, I definitely think Obama was a type of Antichrist. I definitely think Biden was a type of Antichrist. When you think of the Antichrist as doing things against Jesus and against God and against Israel, Obama and Biden definitely fit the bill, but then Trump does too. And the diluting influence on the Trump followers is they think Trump's this great friend of Israel, and that they think he's, appointed by God, to do all these great things to help out Israel, when they don't realize that he's really not helping Israel. He's really making it worse for Israel. So just a lot of delusion where they don't really see, they're not seeing how Trump's fulfilling the Babylon prophecies, and they're not seeing how Trump is really against Israel in the things that he does. And then, oh yes, so on January 9th, so getting into more current news events, on January 9th, we saw Trump with all the oil executives. Okay. So just another, big picture of Babylon. Okay. So, and that connected to, how, Trump is kind of taken over Venezuela, and they've um, captured all those oil tankers. So now they're all sitting around like trying to figure out how they can get the Venezuela oil to start flowing again, and how they can make a ton of money off of the oil from Venezuela. And so tell me that's not Babylon. That is so Babylon. Okay. So it was interesting because during the time of George Bush, the junior, the smaller one, or not smaller, but you know what I mean, the son, they really felt like he went into Iraq. It was interesting that a lot of the conversation during that time was that he went into Iraq because of the oil in Iraq. And and because of his connections to the oil industry. I don't really know what's true with that, but I definitely see it being true with Trump. Okay. Because people are like, well, so Trump claimed that he went to Venezuela because of the drugs. Okay. But if you understand how it's a very strong oil country, then you can see, I mean, because it didn't really make sense. If you're going after drugs, why did you pick Venezuela instead of Mexico or somewhere else? And then it's interesting too, because now Trump wants to get Greenland, and that's another country that's really big with oil. Okay. So Trump is claiming, he always claims one thing when the truth is actually something else. So with Greenland, he's claiming it's for security purposes, but I believe it's for oil. So, and that's because I think he's Gog. Okay. Oh, which leads into this slide. So Trump in Venezuela. Okay, so Trump is Gog. in Ezekiel 38, we read about this guy Gog who invades because he wants to capture spoil and seize plunder. Okay. So now the way prophecy works is, I think many times there's multiple fulfillments, and I think Putin was definitely like the first Gog. Okay. Because he definitely wanted to seize plunder in Ukraine. Like, he really wanted the land of Ukraine. Okay. Um, and then, but then I think Trump's a second fulfillment. Um, there might be others too. But I mean, this helps me see like Trump's actions in a different light, because if the Bible is telling me what his motivation is, and his motivation is to capture spoil and to seize plunder, then I could look at his actions toward Venezuela differently. Okay, like I can step out of that deluding influence to see the truth. Okay. I also think Trump is fulfilling the prophecies of Judas. Okay. So what's interesting in Judas, we have this verse from John 12:6, and I highlighted 12:6 because you can see that could be parsed out to be 666. Okay. So God has all these clues about the Antichrist. That it that we need to uncover. Okay. So now what the Bible says about Judas, it says, now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. Okay, so this verse is following the story of, so there was that woman that took that really expensive perfume and used it to wipe Jesus's feet. And so then Judas was like, why did they do that? They could have took this perfume and sold it to get money to feed the poor. And the Bible says he wasn't really concerned about the poor, but he was really a thief. Okay. So if Trump is connected to Judas, then Trump would be like the thief in the night. Okay. So, and then in Hosea, we read about Ephraim feeds on wind and pursues the east wind continually. He multiplies lies and violence. Moreover, he makes a covenant with Assyria, and oil is carried to Egypt. Okay. So, there's a whole story with Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph. Okay. I think a lot of times Ephraim connects to the Christian church. Okay. And then it's interesting that God says that Ephraim pursues the east wind continually. Okay, so there's a whole story with east and west, left and right. Okay. So let's see, I always say left is to the west and right is to the east. Okay. And so they're pursuing Trump continually. Okay. So it's interesting how they're with the east wind, they're connected to oil. Okay. So oil being carried to like America, which is a type of Egypt, or of course Babylon. And so as of January 15th, I believe there was 6 total oil tankers seized. Okay. So that's interesting because that 6 number connects to the Antichrist 666. Okay. I highlighted oil too because there's a connection to Hanukkah. Okay, because you know how Hanukkah is all about the oil, and Hanukkah is an 8-day holiday. And then what's interesting about Hanukkah too, it's 8 branches, but there's actually a 9th candle that you use to light all the others. I believe the 9th one connects to Jesus, and then the 8 connects to the 8 kings, where and so in all my videos I started counting at Reagan. And then it leads us to Trump was the 6th king that became the 8th king. Okay. And it's worked out really well. And I don't remember all my reasoning for starting at Reagan, but it just has really worked out. And it's been 40 years. since Reagan was in office. Okay. And then, so as of January 9th, we had Trump saying that he wanted to take Greenland by force or buy it. And then they met with him and said it's not for sale. And so now, actually, what we have going on is all the NATO countries are actually sending military reinforcements to Greenland because I think they're worried about what Trump may do because he's kind of a loose cannon. Okay. And Trump's like says he doesn't care about NATO. But that would be a mistake to make NATO your enemy. Okay. Um, so so that's just not a good situation. And I didn't do a slide for this, but it kind of seems like Trump's like, okay, so Trump talked about how he was all about peace and he was going to stop wars, and then now all of a sudden it's like he's on the verge of war with like everybody. But in particular, okay, so like with Venezuela, he went in and captured Maduro. Um, and he was actually talking about doing a second strike. I mean, maybe if the vice president wasn't going to cooperate. But he said, now he said he doesn't have to do that. But just yesterday, I heard on the news that they were telling the airlines to avoid Central America and South America because of possible military something going on. Now that could be because of Colombia. So Trump's also been talking about Colombia. Okay. And then, he's been talking about Greenland. And then he's also been talking about wanting to go bomb Iran. Okay. But then, so Iran's been having protests and then they were killing people. And then, I don't know, supposedly Trump heard from a good source in Iran that they weren't going to kill any more people. And so Trump changed his mind about going to bomb Iran, I think is where we're sitting right now. Okay. But I think I think Iran's trying to trick us. Like they're claiming, oh, we're not, doing this stuff. Because I think they have these plans of, the Bible says whenever they're saying peace and safety, then sudden destruction. So whenever Iran is claiming, oh no, we're back to peace, we're getting along with the protesters, we're no longer killing them, um, that we're gonna listen to you, Trump, and do what you say. It's all a delusion, because they're getting ready to do. I believe probably to attack Israel is what I believe. So I don't buy what they're doing. So okay. This one, okay, I just wanted to throw this in here because I didn't really notice it till lately. So remember we had Roe v. Wade was overturned on 6/24/2022. Okay. And I mean, for the longest time, I did notice that if you add those numbers together, you get 666 out of the date 6/24/2022. But I didn't realize until recently that verse that it's actually talked about in the Bible. Okay, so I think one of the reasons why I put this in here is if you don't think we're in the last days, then you're not seeing how Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. Okay. So in Haggai 1, it says, so the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and worked on the house of the Lord of hosts, their God, on the 24th day of the 6th month in the 2nd year of Darius the king. Okay. So that date would connect to, it's the 24th day of the 6th month, June 24th. Okay, it says 2nd year of Darius the king. So it was the 2nd year of Biden, but also the 2nd year could connect to 2022. Okay. And then what's interesting is that in Daniel 12:11, we read about the 1290 days from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up. There will be 1290 days. So if you take 624 2022 and add 1290 days, you get January 3rd, 2026. And what happened on that day? That was the day that the United States captured Maduro. Okay. So, we can definitely see how, overturning Roe v. Wade was abolishing the regular sacrifice, because we definitely saw how people were sacrificing their babies through abortion. Okay. And so we might not totally understand right now how capturing Maduro becomes the abomination of desolation, because I mean, in a way, it seems like it would be a good thing because, we got this evil dictator out of power. But I guess we got to see how things play out. So, but there is a lot of connection to the 1290 days connected to Trump. Okay. And so, I mean, really, ultimately, I think Trump is the abomination of desolation. Okay. And as I especially believe that when I put all the different 1290s connected to him, it's like, oh yeah. I mean, so it's really interesting because I think the 1260 number that we see in scripture definitely connected to Trump's first term. And then I think this 1290 connects to his second term. Okay. And so what we saw was on Trump's inauguration. Okay. The 120 inauguration was 1290 days after CPAC on 7/11/21. Okay. Okay, so I put in quotes rigged election. Okay, so now I got to think about this. So if CPAC was on 21 in 2021, yeah, so this is talking about the election. Okay, so now I'm really confused about, sorry about this. Sometimes I put these numbers in here. Like I'm trying to abbreviate things and then I kind of forget. Oh, all right, that's the thing. Okay, it's okay. So it's on CPAC on 7/11/21, we had Trump talking at CPAC. Okay, and that's when he did a speech, and that's when he actually talked about the rigged election between him and Biden. Okay, and then if you add 1290 days to that, it brings you all the way to Trump's second inauguration in 2024 on January 20th. Okay. So his inauguration, this for his second term, was 1290 days. Okay. But then we also saw, so 6/2/2021 was when I mean, that was actually when Netanyahu lost power. Okay. And then on 6/4/2021 was when Trump got kicked off of Facebook and stuff like that. And so that was actually the 70th week after the deal of the century. Okay. So you got to look at old videos to hear the whole story. Okay. But if you add 1290 days, that brought us to 12/12/2024, which was when Trump was named Times Person of the Year. Okay. So another 1290 connected to Trump. Then if you take 6/24/2022, okay, so we just talked about that on the last slide. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, and add 1290 days, it takes you to January 3rd when Maduro was captured. So there's at least 3 different instances where the 1290 days mean something and connect to Trump. Okay. So let's read these verses about the abomination of desolation. Okay. And put in your mind Trump being the abomination of desolation. Okay. So it says in Matthew, the book of Matthew 24, which it's always been interesting to me that was, it's Matthew 24, like how much that connects to 2024. Okay. So it says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak, but pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days have been cut short, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. So it's interesting that they're talking about the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Okay. And so that would connect to Trump, standing as president of the United States, being one of the temples. Okay. But then I've also talked about him, like standing in Israel, acting like he's the ruler of Israel too, like his whole Gaza thing that happened on February 4th last year. Okay. Then I highlighted too 17 because I think that connects to January 7th of this year when the riots started. Okay. Which we'll get to and talk about. And then it says, pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. Okay, so we definitely are in the winter right now. The riots started on January 7th. I mean, they started on a Wednesday, but the Sabbath, the 7th day is considered the Sabbath or whatever. But I do think there's dual fulfillment because I definitely think we definitely know. So this is a big connection to the war in Israel because the war in Israel started on the 10th month on October 7th, okay? Which it was a Sabbath when that happened. It might not have been officially winter. I'm not sure when winter. No, actually, Israel might have considered that they moved into winter at that time. But what's really interesting, so that was 10/7 in 2023. And then what's interesting about the riots starting in America, they started on January 7th, okay, which was during the 10th month on the Hebrew calendar. So there's kind of a hidden 10/7 in that date, okay? So I definitely think that's interesting. So when you start writing this stuff out, you start seeing all the connections, okay? So that's connection with Trump in 1290. And then, so here's my slide that I did when I was talking about February 4th. Okay, that was when Trump and Netanyahu made their Gaza announcement. Okay, and that was when Trump said he was going to rebuild Gaza. And I don't remember now. It happened less than a year ago, but it seems like ages ago. Okay. And so we talked about that at this time and just its connection to 2 Thessalonians 2:4, because it says, okay, so this is the verses. It says, now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. So we've already read those verses. But verse 4 says, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. So first I highlighted, let no one in any way deceive you. Okay. So all these prophets that are saying, oh no, the coming of Jesus is it's still, at least 4 years in the future, or maybe another 100 years. Don't believe him, okay? I mean, I guess in these verses they were saying, like when Paul first wrote him, he was saying, well, don't be deceived by someone saying it's, I mean, he was writing to the people of his day. And I think they were all expecting it to happen, in their time frame. And he said, no, 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 you got to wait till the apostasy, and then the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. Well, in our day, we're seeing someone who's deceiving people. And like I said, we've had at least 4 apostasies in our time frame. And then we definitely see Trump, who's the man of lawlessness. He doesn't care what American law is, or international law. And we definitely seen him being a destructive person. Okay. And so second Thessalonians 2:4. So what's really interesting about that is you got 2:4, which would connect to Trump's Gaza announcement on 2:4 of last year. And then, which I talked about how 2 and 4, 2 plus 4 equals 6, while 2 times 4 equals 8. So that connects to the 6th king, who's the 8th king. Okay. And then it's interesting too that it's Second Thessalonians, because that connects to like Trump's 2nd term. Okay, so some guy who has 2 terms. Okay. And so what we're seeing, so Trump's standing in the holy place. Okay, so Trump is currently planning to head the border peace, okay, for Gaza. Okay, that was announced on 9/29. Okay, that's what I'm using the phrase deal of the millennial that someone else said. Okay, just because it matches so well to have DOM and compare it to the DOC, the deal of the century from 2020. Anyways, and so if you want to know how he's being destructive, on 10/20/2025, we see Trump tearing down the east wing, not even asking permission, just doing it. And then on 1/3/2026, we have Trump saying the US will run Venezuela. Okay. So is he or is he not displaying himself as being God? Okay, like he's just in charge of everything. Okay, regardless of what people think. Okay. And that slide, the last slide, is actually from a previous video where I talk more about these pictures. Okay. The golden statue of Trump. Okay. And then, so now recently, okay, and this we actually probably talked about in my December update. But, I just I put this in here because it's another good example of Trump in the temple, okay? Because on 12/18 was when they announced the new name for the Kennedy Center. And so I don't know how much you recognize, like, how disrespectful that is to like plop your name on the Kennedy Center that was named as a memorial for John F. Kennedy. Okay. On 12/19 was when we actually saw the new signage. I mean, they did not waste any time. They plopped up their new signage. Okay. What's interesting is that 18 letters were added. So I highlighted 18, 12/18, and then 18 letters. Because the Donald J. Trump and that was added is 18 letters. So there's another 666 connected to Trump. Okay. For all those people that don't think there's an Antichrist and don't think there's a 666 going on. And then on 12/19, I lost a letter there. 2024 was the Sunrise Project. Okay. That was when the Project Sunrise was pitched by the United States. Okay, so let me read that. The U.S. pitches Project Sunrise plan to turn Gaza into high-tech metropolis The blueprint drafted by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff could have the United States commit to roughly 20% of some reconstruction cost over 10 years. Project Sunrise, building a new and unified Gaza. So and the plan is to have beachside luxury resorts, high speed rail, AI optimized smart grids. Okay. So here's Trump, like, you know, committing to spend American tax dollars to build this thing, and for the average American taxpayer, I mean, do they really want their tax dollars going to build this thing in Gaza? And will we see any of the profits that come out of, this beach resort? If it really happens, which I don't believe it is. I don't think God will allow it to happen. So it's just another way that Americans are being pilfered by Trump, like just using our money like Judas. Okay. um so okay, just checking to see if there's anything else I wanted to say about that. Okay, so then what we saw starting on 12/28, we started seeing Iran. The country started. Okay, so like if you don't think we're in the last days, you're not paying attention to how all these different countries around the world are kind of imploding. And then, so we've had the Iran protests that have been going on. There's also been these huge wildfires in Australia, South Africa, and Argentina. Okay, going on because they're so dry. Okay, I mean in America, so we've had this just incredible massive flooding. First it started in Washington, the state of Washington, then it moved down to California. Okay. But then I'm thinking in January it happened somewhere else too. And I mean, a lot of times I don't put the weather stuff in my videos because it's just, there's so much going on, that you gotta kind of talk about the important stuff. So I can't find anything really quickly about flooding somewhere else, but I do know just in the last couple days, there's been these so on the 15th, because of the winter storms, there was these huge car pileups on I-80 and I-81, like over in the east there. So just there's so much end time signs going on. And also too, if you watch some of my previous videos, you know that I believe we're in the second greater Exodus. Okay, so a lot of the weather signs connect to the plagues in Egypt from the original Exodus. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the Iran protests. They started on 12/28, which was, by the way, 11 months, 9 days after January 20th, when Trump started his second term. Okay. So you see that 9/11 number there. Okay, 9/11 shows up everywhere. Okay. So you definitely want to pay attention to things that happen on 9/11 or 11/9 dates. Okay. So I wrote we're next. Okay. And basically I know that God's planning to bring down America or Babylon through civil war. Okay. So with the Iran protests, okay, so I put in this verse from Genesis 35 about Deborah. Rebecca's nurse died, and she was buried below Bethel under the oak. It was named Elon Bakuth, like oak of weeping. Okay, and so we saw when Jacob was trying to get into the promised land, like, so Deborah had died, and Rachel died. Okay. And so what I believe is Deborah could represent Iran, and then Rachel dying definitely could represent the United States. Okay. Because then out of her death, she had a second son. Okay, that's when Benjamin was born. Okay. Um, so then Daniel 5. Okay. So with the Iran protests, here's what I think God is saying. Okay, so in Daniel 5, so we have this king Belshazzar, okay, who was arrogant, and he was drinking wine with all his, you know, whatever friends and whatever, and they, he had them bring the vessels that they had taken out of the temple, okay, because he wanted to drink out of them, okay, the vessels of silver and gold, um and well, so then Belshazzar, he's the writing on the wall guy, if you know the writing on the wall story, and it comes from Daniel 5, and you could go and read it to get the whole story, because sometimes with time limitations I can't do the whole story, but there's so much in that chapter. Okay, so Daniel says to him, okay, so with the writing on the wall, Belshazzar wanted someone to interpret it, and no one could do it except Daniel. Okay, so Daniel came and he said, okay, so here's his interpretation. He said, O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished he killed, whomever he wished he spared alive, and whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this, but you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze, iron, wood, stone, which do not see, hear, or understand. But the God in whose hand are your life breath and all your ways, you have not glorified. Okay, so I did talk in some of my previous videos how originally the first fulfillment of this was Biden, okay? But now the second fulfillment of this is Trump, okay, in a big way, okay? And so hopefully I got the guy's name right. I wrote Khamenei, and hopefully that's the guy, the current, what do they call him, a high leader? I don't remember, the guy who's like he's not like the president of Iran, but he's their like religious leader, okay? And so he was originally so he's this he's fulfilling the prophecy in Nebuchadnezzar, who was, he got so arrogant, and so then so then we saw the people in Iran protesting against the government, okay? And so it was supposed to be a warning to Belshazzar, when, the Belshazzar should have saw, because he was actually the son of Nebuchadnezzar, like he should have saw what happened to his dad and be more humble, okay? And so the same thing with Trump. Trump should have saw what happened to Khamenei, if that's the right guy, to to know, that he needed to humble his heart, okay? But that's not what's happening. Trump's running around, and so it's interesting because we just, we had Belshazzar and his nobles were drinking, wine from the vessels, so when I read that, I just thought about, how Trump's wanting to spend America's money to rebuild Gaza. He's just welcoming himself to America's, um, what would you call it? Like riches, or you know, like um oh, I can't think of that word. Just the oh, sorry. I'm not, I can't think of that word, but just all the like valuable stuff in America, because we even see him wanting to use America's military for his purposes. Okay, so he's just um you know uh just um welcoming himself to use these the things of America to accomplish his purposes. Okay, whether God would want that or not, Trump doesn't care. He's just doing what he wants. Okay, um so then the next page is, so I put down the rest of the chapter, because then you got to see what happens to understand what's going to happen to Trump. Okay, so then it says the hand was sent from him and this inscription was written out. So the hand was sent from God and this inscription was written out. Now this is the inscription that was written out: Mene Mene Tekel Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Okay. Oh, I didn't highlight 26, but look at that. That was verse 26. Okay. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. And then Paris, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third in the kingdom. That same night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Okay. So I believe that this is a prophecy where, okay, that it says God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Okay. I believe Trump's second term, he's going to have a very short, I think he only gets 1 year. Okay. Um, and the only thing I'm not sure about is when did God start counting that 1 year? Like, is it, um, if it's from based on his inauguration, then his time is almost over. Okay, like we are so close. Okay, but if God like maybe started counting, like um another thought was like maybe God started counting on February 4th, okay, when Trump made that Gaza announcement. I don't really believe it can go much farther than February 4th, okay? Um, but we'll see what happens. But what's interesting, but I think what we're seeing, so one of the things that's interesting is, okay, so the month of January was 7 months. Okay, I don't know, like if it's 7 months from when, maybe it was when Trump was in the Middle East. Okay, so that was in May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's from his trip to the Middle East. So it's been like 7 months, but I know that the month of January it connects to being the seventh month from something. Okay. Um and so then January 1st, New Year's Day would connect to Rosh Hashanah on the Jewish calendar. Okay. Um, and at the beginning of the year, but we're definitely fulfilling some of the prophecies of the Jewish New Year, because at the beginning of the Jewish New Year, they believe that that's when God decides like who's going to be written in the book of life for the year, like who's going to rule and who's going to be in charge and all that kind of stuff. Um, and so I think it's highly possible that on January 1st was when Trump was weighed on the scales and found deficient. Okay. And so on January 1st this year, God decided who was going to be judged and go away, and then who was going to remain. Okay. And then that verse about your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. Okay, so that could be a picture, a shadow of the rioting in America. Okay, because if we see, and we probably haven't even seen the full, like, I think it just continues to escalate. Okay, because I mean, first Renee Good got shot, and then the riots started. Well, I guess you can say they started as protests. Okay, um, but then they were the protesters, like at nighttime they were starting to hassle the ICE people in their hotels, and so then they get even more like um violent, and and then so then they get more violent, and then it just goes back and forth, and it just continues to escalate. And so I don't think we've even seen the full escalation, because I think what we're gonna see is full civil war in America. Okay. um but anyways, so your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. And I think all this stuff in scripture, there's this shadow of, with Trump being the guy that causes division. Okay, and the left and the right, and the because the times and half the time connects to the division. Okay, the dividing of time. Okay, so the people strongly being divided, left and right. um, because in Genesis we read about, oh, I don't remember the guy's name, but it talks about how in his days the world, oh, I think it might be Peleg. Um, in his days the world was divided. Okay. And so I believe Trump is fulfilling that prophecy where in his days America got divided, like really strongly, enough that they're fighting against each other. Okay. And then we read about Darius the Mede receiving the kingdom at about the age of 62. Okay, so I'm wondering if that's Messiah. Um, and so I have, so that 62 number. Okay, so I have it on a slide. Okay, so actually January 13th was 62 weeks after they declared Trump the winner on 11/6/24. Okay. Um, so we just gotta wait and see. So that week kind of ends like January 19th. So we'll see if something happens then. Okay, like the Messiah returns then. So that's a possibility. Um, okay. And then, okay, so then here's another, like, I want you to see how these, okay, like, okay, so it's interesting that, oh, this is why. Okay, so if we're fulfilling prophecy, like, so this is what I'm seeing in the scripture. Okay, and I want you to see how we might be fulfilling prophecy, like in real time, like right now in our day. Okay. um and so okay, so let me read this section from Esther 4. It says, then Mordecai told to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Okay, so I think there could be a hidden picture in this. Like, sometimes it's hard to see these prophecies where it's like, I think there's a hidden picture where Esther is really actually a picture of um, a a protester slash rioter in these verses, like a hidden picture. I mean, the original Esther, she was a good woman, okay, but I think there's a hidden picture of these protesters right now where someone says to them, you know, if you say silent right now and you don't speak out about this evil that Trump's doing, um you know, everyone's, you know, you're gonna die under Trump. And so, you know, you better take your power to protest against what he's doing. Okay. um and so what's interesting, Esther says, go assemble all the Jews to fast for 3 days, night or day. So I'm wondering if the the Jews fasting is a picture of the 3 weeks of protests in Iran that we've seen. Or, well, it's been like 2.5 weeks, and supposedly the protests have kind of died down, but it'd be 3 weeks before this January 19th date that I'm looking at. Um, so I'm wondering if, I'm wondering if that's a picture of, first we have the Iran protest, and then Esther and her maidens fast would be a picture of the protests in America. Okay. Because what's interesting is that Esther says, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So we have all these protesters that, like, basically are the lawless ones. Okay. They don't care if they break the law, and they don't care if they get killed. Okay. They're feeling called to do this. Okay. Against, they're feeling called to go against the law. They're feeling called to put their lives on the line. Okay. Um, so that was one thought I had. So we just have to see the timing of how things pan out, basically, to see if that is what's being fulfilled. Um, and then I wanted to talk about the prophetic significance of 17. Okay, so what we've had is 17 years. Obama had 8, Trump had 4, Biden had 4, and now Trump has, we're getting up to his 1 year anniversary. So 8 plus 4 plus 4 plus 1 equals 17 years. Okay, because we saw that Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And then it said the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. Okay, so do you see a hidden 47 there? Like Jacob lived 100, and then you have 47 years. So Trump is number 47. Okay, he's the 47th president. So what I'm wondering is if Messiah is going to be considered like the 48th president, because what's really interesting about that number is that Israel became a nation in 1948. Okay. Um, and then, so then that helps me understand the solar eclipse that we had on April 8th. Okay. Because it's 4/8. Okay. And that was back in 2024. It's like 488. And so what I'm wondering is if, like, 4/8 connects to the Messiah, who's number 48, and then you have the 8 that connects to Trump, the 8th king. Okay. So that's a possibility. And then we also see Joseph, when he was 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Okay. So Joseph was 17. Okay. So that would connect to the 17 years that we're in right now. And then there was 2 bad groups. Okay. Because Joseph gave a bad report. Okay. And so what are the 2 bad groups? We're seeing left and right in America um, being the 2 bad groups. Okay. Protesting, rioting, civil war. Okay. Um, so, I mean, what's interesting in the story about the fall of Sodom, Lot says, I have two daughters, two virgin daughters, you can do whatever you want to them. Okay. And so I'm wondering if the two daughters connect to these two bad groups. Okay. Um, so anyways. Um, and then 17 also matches January 7th, 1/7, when the protest started. Okay. Dun dun dun. Interesting connection, huh? So, and then we see in Genesis 35. So this is Rachel when she dies. Okay. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." It came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Okay. So Bethlehem, remember, that's where Jesus was born. Okay. So definitely got to pay attention to the story if we want to know when Jesus is going to be born or return. So what's interesting is that there's the verse number 17. I highlighted that, so that connects to January 7th, when she was in severe labor, because I definitely think these protests could be a picture of the severe labor. Okay. But then we see that Rachel ends up dying. Okay. So we can see a picture of America like dying. Okay. But the midwife says, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." So just as Rachel's soul is departing, just as America's soul is departing, we're going to see the Messiah return. Okay. And then with the two names, Ben-Oni and Benjamin, because Ben-Oni is like son of my sorrow, which I think that's Trump. And then Benjamin is son of my right hand. I think that's the title for the Messiah, for Jesus. Okay. So definitely very interesting. Okay. And so then I saw this too. Okay. So we had two peace deals of Trump, the deal of the century and then the deal of the millennium. Okay. And then we had 2 times of protests, riots. Okay. So did you recognize how these riots happen during both Trump's terms? Okay. Um, just thought I'd point that out. But remember this dream that Pharaoh had a dream? So it said it happened. Okay, now it happened at the end of 2 full years. This is from Genesis 41. It happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears thin and scorched by the east wind sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Okay, so sometimes I think when we read about a dream, I think that could connect to Trump's peace, quote unquote, peace deals. Okay, so it said it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. Okay, so 2 full years could connect to his 2 peace deals, but I think I don't remember if the deal of the century was in the second year. No, it wasn't the second year of Trump. So that doesn't work. But the at the end of 2 full years would be the time frame of 2 peace deals. Okay. So Pharaoh had a dream, and then so we had 7 cows that were okay, sleek also means beautiful and plump, okay? But then ugly and gaunt cows came up from the Nile, and they ate the 7 sleek and fat cows. So that could be a picture of the BLM protest riots, okay? Because remember, they were actually breaking into the stores and stuff like that too, okay? I mean, they definitely really turned into riots. I mean, not if you were only paying attention to the news where the the reporter would stand in front of the like protest with the building burning in their background, and they would be saying peaceful protests. I mean, it was just a crazy making time where they were trying to keep saying that the protests were peaceful when there was rioting going on. Okay. Then it says, then Pharaoh awoke. Okay. So what happened was, so during Trump's term, first term, we had the BLM riots. But then they kind of went away after Biden came back. Okay, so then it said then Pharaoh awoke, and so I wrote Biden's head wound is healed, because that's the thing people aren't recognizing, that like the left lost power when Trump became president the first time, but then it's like their head wound, their authority was restored for another term, and so Biden had another 4 years to do all the stuff from the left. Okay. Then it said he fell asleep and dreamed a second time, so that would connect to Trump's. So it's interesting that it said he fell asleep, like Trump was sleeping when he came up with the quote unquote deal of the millennium the second time. Then what we have now is 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Okay, so that would be all like the Trump followers. Okay, just following Trump regardless of what he does. But then 7 years thin and scorched by the east wind. So remember, I said look for east because that connects to Trump being on the right. Okay, so they were scorched by Trump. They sprouted up after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump. And the plump ears too, talking about like fat. You know how Trump and all his people are fat. You know, the rich and the fat. And so then what we're seeing is the Renee Good protests and riots. And then it says Pharaoh awoke and behold it was a dream. So that could be a picture of Messiah's return, because remember how the prophecy says when Messiah returns it's going to feel like we were dreaming. Okay, because God's going to meet all our needs, fulfill all his promises, and it's going to feel like a dream. Okay, so that's what I think we got going on. Okay, so it's an incredible fulfillment of prophecy going on right now. So oh, and two, I think with the what's interesting is the 7 ears thin and scorched by the east wind, they were also on a single stalk. Wait, does it say? It doesn't really say about them being on a single stalk. Huh. I didn't notice that before. I'll have to go look at that, because at first I thought the single stalk would be a picture of like, I mean, the cows I think would be a picture of the golden calf, whereas like Black Lives Matter and like the anti-cop rhetoric would be kind of like a golden cow of the left. Excuse me. But then like, so I thought the 7 ears of corn, I thought they were on a single stalk too, would be a picture of like, I mean, actually now with the protests, it's like they almost like protest almost anything nowadays. It's not just anti-ICE, even though that's a very big part of it, but it's definitely anti-Trump. But I mean, in one of the protests, I actually saw Indians in full costume dancing in the streets. So if you read their signs, they're like protesting almost anything. So I'll have to check on that to see if the thin ears are on a single stalk, or if they're not, I mean, because then that would connect to Biden with the 7 horns. So anyways, I'll have to look at that. So they started on the Renee Good protest started January 7th. it was Orthodox Christmas. It was 1 year after the LA fires. And so I remember seeing with the LA fires, we had fire and ice because we had the fires in LA, and then we had ice, winter storms happening on the other side of the country. So it's interesting because we're seeing a repeat of the fire and ice with the protests, like where the ice would be, the ice, the immigration enforcement is the ice, and then the fire would be the way the protesters are protesting is through fire. Sometimes you see fires in the street. Okay. And then, so the protest started 1 year after the start of the inauguration festivities on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, 5 years after Biden's electoral count. Okay, because remember, his electoral count was on January 7th instead of January 6th because of the January 6th riots. Okay, so then they'd be 5 years after the January 6th riots, too. Okay. It was Tevid 18 on January 7th. Okay. So what's interesting about that is that the riots actually started, the protests started 100. So you'll have to bear with me. I tend to just use protests and riots like interchangeably, and hopefully that doesn't drive you crazy. But just because I really think these protests are definitely going to turn into full-blown riots, which are going to turn into full-blown civil war, just so you understand. Okay, so that's probably why I use them interchangeably. um so the Renee Good protest started 120 days after the Charlie Kirk assassination. It was 119 days after 9/11. I have that on a chart that I'll show you. It's just fascinating. And the Charlie Kirk assassination was actually on Elul 17. So there's the 17 and the 18 numbers connected to these two events, okay, which those numbers connect to. Well, first of all, it was interesting that Charlie Kirk was assassinated on Elul 17, because was that a picture of how the riots were going to be starting on January 7th? But the numbers 17 and 18 also connect to Revelation 17 and 18, where you have the story about Babylon. Okay. So definitely fascinating. Okay. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about that. Um, um, but then what I think too with these Renee Good protests is I think this was the shot heard around the world. Okay. So in the Revolutionary War, there was a shot that they call it the shot heard around the world because there was, I mean, one of the guys started shooting, and it actually, what they consider started the Revolutionary War. Where where the actual, it really escalated the fighting between the people in America and Britain. So definitely fascinating. I think also too, I think January 3rd with Trump going and I was gonna say kidnapping Maduro. I don't know what to call it. When he went and grabbed Maduro, I think that was also a shot heard around the world. Okay. And maybe God agrees because that 1290 number is connected to it. Okay. So here's another verse that's highly connected to what's going on. Okay, so in Luke 21, it says, by your endurance, you will gain your lives. Okay, so I left that verse in there because I think God is saying, don't protest. Okay, don't, but it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst of the city must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land, and wrath to this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword, and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Okay. Very significant. Okay. So when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, so that could be both. Okay, the armies could be the ICE people and the protesters. Okay. But Trump's actually talking about, I don't know if this is going to happen, but it might. Like, Trump is actually talking about sending in the National Guard back into the cities. Okay. To deal with the protesters. Okay, so that might be the total full fulfillment. But we could see that we have ICE and the protesters being the armies of people right now. Okay, whether you know, Trump actually does send in the National Guard or not. So then it says those. I mean, we already saw, Trump sending National Guard into cities. We already saw that happening, so we already saw the, partial fulfillment of these verses earlier with Trump and the National Guard. And so maybe now the fulfillment is ICE and the protesters. And then it says, if you're in Judea, which means you are connected to Jesus, okay, Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, flee to the mountains, okay, which, Jesus is on the mountain or whatever. Be clothed with Messiah, okay. Don't protest, like I said. But oh well, so the other connection about the mountains, fleeing to the mountains, is there's that psalm that says, I look to the mountains, where does my help come from? Okay. So we want to look to the mountains to find our help. Okay. We're not looking to Trump and we're not looking to these protests to save us. We're looking to Jesus. Okay. Anyways, if you're in the midst of the city, then you should leave. Okay. I wrote Trump's peeps because that could also be a picture of the people in the city are the ones that are in charge. Okay. I mean, there is the thing of like they're trying to, people want ICE to get out of the city. Okay. And then it says those who are in the country must not enter the city. So I wrote Biden's peeps, because like if you're not in power, you're considered to be like in the wilderness. Okay. But just looking at the true, the face value of these verses, if you're not in the city, if you're in the city, leave. Okay. And if you're in the country, don't go into the city. Okay. Because it says these are days of vengeance. So do you see that left is, taking out their vengeance on the right, and right is taking out their vengeance on the left? Hopefully you see that happening. So there be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. So we're under God's wrath, okay? So I mean, it has a lot to do with Trump's sins, okay? Because when one man sins, a lot of times many other people suffer, which is, kind of sad. But that's why we need Jesus to come to save us from God's wrath. Okay. And then, so then that verse, Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Okay. So remember, I'd said that Jerusalem could be a shadow of America. Okay. If you understand that Israel is divided in two, and part of it's in America and part of it's in Israel. So the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, could be considered America. Will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And see that foot word too? We're at the foot of the statue. Okay, Daniel's statue. Okay. So we're gonna see these riots, protests, I think, just escalating until Jesus comes back. And I don't even know, like, when Jesus comes, there's a possibility that like there's a great earthquake when Jesus returns, and so these, protests like totally escalate into full-blown riots. Okay, is what I'm wondering. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Okay, so but be smart and stay out of the city. Okay. And then Okay, it says, therefore, this is from Matthew 24, be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and not allowed his house to be broken into. So here I think the head of the house could connect to Trump, and then the thief coming could connect to these rioters, protesters. Okay. For this reason, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give him their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect, and in an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay, so if we think that God has kind of lost control, then we haven't been reading God's word, because I believe in the last days. So Jesus is saying in the last days, like right before comes, there's going to be two types of slaves, and one of them's going to be faithful and sensible and be feeding God's people, like doing his job basically. But then there's going to be these evil slaves who think Jesus isn't going to return for a really long time, and they begin to beat their fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards. Okay. So we shouldn't be shocked that we see ICE being like violent, okay, because that's what Jesus said is going to happen in the last days. Okay, so they're beating their fellow slaves. So Jesus told us that would happen. Okay, I think these verses also connect to Trump too. I mean, because originally I was reading these verses and saying the evil slave is Trump, because he started beating his fellow slaves and eating and drinking with drunkards. Okay, but then we definitely seen the ICE people fulfill them too. Okay. And so then too, when they were in the first Exodus, in the book of Exodus, God talks about there being a cloud by day and a fire by night. And I heard that phrase and I said, that kind of reminds me of the protests. Like, maybe during the day they're a little bit more peaceful. And so it's more of like a cloud of people by day, but then at night that's when the fires like get lit and stuff like that, like they just start getting really violent. um so and then like I said, I think we could see these Renee Good protests like totally escalating into full out civil war, which would be the fire by night. So um okay, and and this is hilarious, but I was watching the Polar Express, and they sing that song, you better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout, I'm telling you why Santa Claus is coming to town. And they sing it kind of like stretched out. It was kind of interesting because it just really grabbed my attention, because I'm like, that's like the protest. It's like, okay, stop crying and pouting and protesting, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so they were saying in the song, they say Santa Claus is coming to town, but I'll tell you why. It's because Jesus is returning. Okay, so stop pouting. So I just thought that was so interesting. Okay. And so it was interesting because the riot started on January 7th, which was the Orthodox Christmas. There is a third Christmas coming up that's January 19th. Okay. So I'm wondering, like it talks a lot about Jesus on the third day, so I'm wondering if it connects to the third Christmas. So we'll see what happens. And then, um, Okay, and we read about in Revelation about the 10 horns are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority with the beast for 1 hour. So 1 hour we know is the time frame of the judgment of Babylon. Okay, and it says these have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb. And then it says, the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot and make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. So you got to understand. So I actually think the 10 horns, like I think there's 10 horns on the right and 10 horns on the left. Okay. That the 10 horns connect to the 10 spies in the wilderness. When Israel was in the wilderness, so I'll read about this. In Numbers 13, it says, so they, the 10 spies, gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone in spying it out is the land that devours its inhabitants, and the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. Okay, so if you remember the story, they actually sent 12 spies or whatever, but 10 of them came back. Okay, so they went to spy out the land and see what it's like, and 10 of them came back with a bad report of the land, but 2 of them had faith and said, well, God's going to help us get the land. But these 10 were like, oh no, this land, there's giants in the land. These are actually the people that said the giants in the land. So then if you understand about the 10 spies, then you will understand when Revelation talks about the 10 horns. Okay. These will be the people on the right and the people on the left that don't have faith. Okay. But God gives them authority for 1 hour. Okay. Which would be the time of these protests that turn into riots, that turn into civil war. Okay. And so God's going to use these people with no faith to bring judgment on all the other people with no faith. Okay. So that's what we got going on with the 10 horns. Okay. And so I had actually been expecting these riots. Okay. Because, okay, I mean, ever since October, so we saw at the end of October people posting videos about pillaging Walmart and Costco if their SNAP got cut off. Okay, and so then I had this chart where I was comparing the deal of the century, so Trump's peace proposal on January 28th, which by the way went nowhere, but we still suffered so much judgment from that. Okay. What's interesting is, so now on September 29th, he had the deal of the millennium. I mean, they're still like trying to pursue that. I mean, they're still like trying to make that come to fruition. But I was thinking that the judgments would be really similar. Okay, so what we saw with the deal of the century was 7 weeks later was the COVID shutdown, and then 120 days later was the George Floyd riots, and then 190 days later they had that explosion in Lebanon. Okay, and that really started what I call a fiery furnace phase. Okay, because they had the explosion in Lebanon, but then there was just horrible fires in America too. Okay. So we saw with the deal of the millennium that there was a shutdown that happened there too. Okay, that was the US shutdown that was on October 1st and it lasted for 42 days. Okay. What was interesting that the vote to end the shutdown was on 11/9. Okay. So 9/11 and 11/9 shows up everywhere. Okay. And then, so then I've had this chart in my videos because I was like, well, how many days later will we see the riots in America? And then how many days later will we see the fiery furnace in Israel? So I was expecting all this to happen. So So now, so now we could fill in another slot on this chart. And so what was interesting was that 120 days. So the 120 days actually, it didn't connect to September 29th. It actually was after Charlie Kirk's assassination. Okay, was when these riots started. Okay. So we filled in another slot. So then, like, the next step or judgment that we could expect is some fiery furnace type phase. And I think, like I said, I think that could be Israel getting attacked by Iran. But I also think it connects to these riots turning into full-fledged civil war in America. So, um, so, and then, so with the deal of the century, 6 weeks and 2 days later was when they declared COVID being a pandemic. And we're seeing after the deal of the millennium, it was 7 weeks later. Okay, so one of the things that you got to keep in mind is that we were in a shutdown in America in October 2025. So some of the so we actually didn't have good reporting on the flu season. Okay, but I did find this local epidemiologist article where she said a rough flu season may be taking shape, and that was actually on the date. I didn't put the date in here, but it was actually 7 weeks after the deal of the millennium. Okay, so so just so you know, there's 4 judgments. There's the disease, and actually now it's not just flu. We got flu, measles, uh I can't, COVID is still hanging around. And then what, norovirus is out there, and then what, there's one more too. Maybe it's just cold or whatever. They have that commercial where they say Noroko or whatever. I don't know what the different diseases are, but definitely lots of diseases. Okay, so in the story, when they were in the wilderness, Moses had to tell Aaron, like, quick, you better go out there because the plague is starting. Okay, so God had sent a plague that was killing the people. Okay, and so that's a picture of how we need Jesus to come and put a stop to the plague. Okay, whether it's the flu. I mean, the flu numbers are kind of off the chart right now. Especially now they're like the kids with the flu. It's really sad. It's really high with the kids right now. So anyways, so I did a color coding so you could see, the pandemic of COVID connects to the flu season in 2025. The shutdown of COVID connects to the shutdown in October 1st. And then the George Floyd riots are connecting to the Renee Good riots. And then, like I said, we haven't seen yet the explosion, the fiery furnace phase. Okay, so and then I did a chart here to compare the riots in America, the George Floyd riots with the Renee Good riots. Okay, so what was interesting about George Floyd, okay, so see how the orange stuff, like 9/11 is everywhere. Okay, Renee Good is 9 letters. George Floyd is 11 letters. Okay, so you get 9/11 right there. We had with the George Floyd riots, so he was actually killed on 5/25, and then the riots started on 5/26. Okay, so we had the 119 days after the deal of the century was when George Floyd got killed, but 120 days after the deal of the century was when the riots started. Okay, so we have a repeat of that 119 and 120 numbers. Okay, with the Renee Good protest, it was 120 days after Charlie Kirk's assassination, but 119 days after 9/11. Okay, I thought it was interesting because the protests started on 526 in 2020, and I'm thinking that 26 points to 2026. So definitely interesting. And then with 525, when George Floyd actually died, the 25 could connect to January 7th, the 7. Okay. So definitely lots of clues. Okay, with George Floyd, the 9/11 connection with his was, so they, after watching the video, they saw that um the policeman had, what, he was kneeling on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Okay, so there's a 9/11 number there. You got to take the 9 and the 2 and add them together to get 11. Okay, you got to do some calculating to find out what the numbers mean. Okay, with the George Floyd riots, they started, well, George Floyd got killed at 38th East and Chicago in Minneapolis. Okay, so 38, that's a 11 number there. Okay. With Renee Good, the shooting was actually 9:37, and then the 9/11 calls started at 9:38. Okay. So what's interesting about the shooting being at 9:37 is if you take the 7 plus the 3, you get 10, which connects back to Charlie Kirk's shooting, which was on September 10th. Okay. And then with the Renee Good riots, they started, or well, she got shot on Portland Avenue between the 33rd and the 34th streets, which was less than a mile from George Floyd shooting. Okay. Dun dun dun. Okay, so very interesting. Okay. And then I was running out of room with my charts, but the George Floyd riots were, okay, so the protests were anti-police and Black Lives Matter, which, like I said, they were, they turned into riots at night. Okay. Um and then Black Lives Matter as an organization ended up being an evil organization. The people ended up using the money for buying themselves big houses. Just a lot of bad stuff went on. And then so what's interesting about the Renee Good protest is the protests range from anti-ICE, anti-Trump, but it just seems like it's almost anything. Like if you read the signs, like, like I think, I mean, in one of the protests I saw, maybe I already said this in the video, but Indians in full costume in the protest. I mean, there's stuff about gay pride in the protest. I mean, just you name it, it's in the protest. Okay, so I mean, just a lot of, I guess I already talked about this before, but yeah, just the different things that they're protesting. Okay, so what's interesting about Minneapolis, where these protests started, Minneapolis is called the City of Waters. Minnesota is called, it means cloudy water. Okay. So the name Minneapolis actually means City of Waters. I probably didn't say that quite right. Well, so in Revelation 17, we read about, okay, so one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said, "Come here, I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are people, multitude, nations, and tongues." Okay. So that could be a description of these protesters. It's especially the protesters on the left. Like I said, that they're protesting anything. I mean, so it's a mixture of, and see, it's interesting too because ICE is coming in to try to get rid of the immigrants. They're trying to get rid of the people, multitude, and nations and tongues and make it kind of a homogenous society or whatever. So definitely very fascinating. I highlighted 17 because, like I said, 17 connects to 1 7. Okay. So Revelation 17 connects to 1:7, which is when the Renee Good protest um, slash riots leading into civil war started. So then in verse 16 of Revelation 17, it says, "And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot and make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire." Um, so the 10 horns plus the beast, there's 11 there total. So that connects to Trump being, um, I mean, I think that verse connects to both the protesters, but it also like connects to Trump and his followers. Okay. Because, it adds up to 11 when you add in the beast. Okay. Because Trump's number 47, which is 11. Okay. Which adds up to 11. Okay. Um, that's why I said I think we could see, um, like these protests just escalating to all out sheer civil war. So, oh, did I say everything? Oh, also too with I wanted to point out the 120 years, or the 120 number, which we see connected to these protests. Right here, 120 days after the deal of the century and 120 days after Charlie Kirk assassination, connects to in Genesis 6. That's when God says, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years." Okay. Um, so 120 connects to judgment. Okay. So how long for the riots? Okay. I was thinking maybe 6 + 6 days. I mean, it could be longer. Um, but one of the reasons why I was thinking that is, so in Esther 2, we see the women um have so it says, "After the end of her 12 months, under the regulations for the women, for the days of their beautification were completed as follows: 6 months of oil and with oil and myrrh, oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for the women." So we see that 12-month time frame, which would connect to Trump's 1 year. But then we see 6 months plus 6 months, which could connect to 6 days of protests, plus 6 more days of protests. And actually, what kind of happened in the middle so far? Well, if they last for 12 days, we did see Trump sending in more ICE people in the middle. So that's one reason why I'm thinking that. But we see in part and we prophesy in part. Like, I definitely know the 12 months thing is very significant, because that relates to Trump getting 12 months, which is 666, connects to the 666 of the Antichrist. And then in Leviticus 12, we have this really kind of weird story about when a woman gives birth and she bears a male, then she's unclean for a certain amount of time. But then if she bears a female child, she's unclean for another different time frame. So I was wondering if, like, the first birth is a male and then the second birth is a female. And so I was wondering if the first birth connects to Trump's deal of the century, and then the second birth connects to Trump's deal of the millennium. So because we have, it says for the when she gives birth to a baby boy, it says she's unclean for 7 days, and we saw that 7 weeks after Trump's deal of the century was the COVID shutdown. And then it says, "On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised." I didn't know if maybe that connected to the fiery furnace on August 4th. Then it says, "She shall remain in the blood of her purification for 33 days. And so I was wondering if that connects to Trump's 6 quote unquote peace deals that he did for the rest of 2020, which I have on a chart. And then, okay, but then when she bears a female child, which would be the second birth, she will be unclean for 2 weeks. Okay, week 14 after the deal of the millennium was the start of the riots. Okay. Um, so, as I always like chart these out and keep track of time frame and stuff. And then it says, she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 66 days. Okay, I really hope we don't have to like wait for 66 days of rioting. Okay. Um, I don't know, but maybe. So we would really need God's help to wait and attain. Okay. But I'm wondering if the 66 connects to 12 days of riots. Okay. Because then it goes on to say, when the days of her purification are completed, for a son or a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. So, what happens at the end, at the doorway, is a lamb gets sacrificed and a pigeon or a dove gets sacrificed. Okay. Which could be a picture of like Civil War. Okay. These pictures of sacrifices. So that was one thought. So Jeremiah 9:11. This is why I think Israel is going to be the fiery furnace, because in Jeremiah 9:11 it says, "I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals," which to me connects to the lion's den. Okay, which would connect to the protests and riots in America. Okay, then it says, and this is where too, where you see these verses and you're like, okay, so Jerusalem and Judah, maybe in Bible prophecy, are like two, God's talking about two different things. Okay, and so that's why I connect Jerusalem to America. And then it says, I will make the cities of Judah a desolation without inhabitants. So I think that could connect to Israel, the Jewish nation of Israel. And then, so I'm wondering if that's the fulfillment of the fiery furnace, okay, in Israel. Okay. So we'll just have to wait and see. So it's interesting too that the number is 9:11, Jeremiah 9:11. Okay, and they actually read it on Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av, which is the 9th day on the 11th month on their calendar. Okay, so that number shows up everywhere. Okay, and so I had actually had this chart going because I was like going, okay, what's going to start the Civil War? And so I was making a list of different things that I thought might start the Civil War. Like Trump's DEI policies, or Trump put National Guard in the cities, or his immigration policies, on and on and on. And so I kind of I couldn't find a check mark in the slides, so I put this red blob. So it's kind of like Trump's immigration policies. And then I also kind of put the blob for Trump putting National Guard in the various cities, because just, they don't, it's kind of connected. So, anyways, so definitely interesting. And then I wanted to give you some verses to encourage you during the protesting riots. It's in Psalm 57, it says, "And in the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until destruction passes by." And then it says, "My soul is among lions." So that connects to the lion's den. In Exodus 14, Moses says, "Do not fear, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians who you have seen today, you will never see them again forever." Okay, so at that time in the first Exodus, God got rid of the Egyptians that were the Israelites' enemies. And so, so in the second greater Exodus, God's going to get rid of our enemies. Okay. In Matthew 26, okay, so Jesus said, okay, so in Matthew 26, it says, "Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew out his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, 'Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. By the sword. Or do you not think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? How then will the scriptures be fulfilled which say that it must happen this way. Okay. So that is true today too, that all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. So we're not supposed to fight. We're supposed to stand by and wait for God to bring salvation. Okay. And then Psalm 78 says, "Yet they still continue to sin against him, to rebel against the Most High in the desert, because they did not believe in God and did not trust in his salvation. Then he will let them fall in the midst of their camp, round about their dwellings, and smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the first issue of their virility in the tents of Ham. But he led forth his own people like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. He led them safely so that they did not fear, but the sea engulfed their enemies." Okay, very powerful psalm. You can actually pull out your Bible and read, like, the whole chapters of these things. So really powerful. Okay. So, and then when it says in verse 51 of Psalm 78, it says, "And smote all the firstborn in Egypt." So the firstborn would be like the ones in charge. Okay. Because there's this whole story about how God replaces the firstborn with another firstborn. There's a reversal of fortunes. Okay. That the people in charge, like God's people are going to become the firstborn. We're not in charge. Right now we're being oppressed. Okay, but then when God does a reversal of fortune, then we will become the firstborn in charge. And I've been saying this for a long time. Don't go either left or right, because in Deuteronomy it says, "You shall not turn aside to the right or the left." Okay. And then in Luke 22 we read about, so I told you left and right is like throughout the scripture. It says there arose a dispute among them, the disciples, as to which one of them was regarded to be the greatest. Okay. And so that's what we're seeing right now with the left versus the right. Okay. This fight against who's the better one, who's got the moral high ground. And so what does it do? It turns into civil war. Okay, so I've been showing this picture for a long time. I said if you see a fire on the right, a fire on the left, then you are out of time. And so that's where we're at. I mean, that's why, like, it could seem kind of weird that I'm excited about these riots, but I think it means we are out of time, that we are at the end of days, and Jesus is right at the door. So and so this is a little happier slide, the Star of Bethlehem. So when Jesus was born, there was magi from the east that came to follow the star. And so on December 19th, so there's two possible fulfillments of the Star of Bethlehem. On December 19th, we saw Comet 31 Atlas. They had its closest approach around midnight. Okay. That was on the 6th day of Hanukkah. Okay. So Steve Fletcher actually had this in one of his videos, but I couldn't find it. I hope he didn't take it down because it was so cool. Because he actually pointed out how the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel had been kind of keeping track of Comet 31 since they first discovered it. Okay, which I thought, like, oh, that's a really cool fulfillment of prophecy. The Weizmann Institute. Okay. But then on January 10th, we also saw Jupiter being the brightest planet in the east among twin stars Castor and Pollux. Okay. So I highlighted east because that connects how the wise men in Jesus' day were following the star in the east. Okay. So, and then the vice president of Venezuela. So I showed you, okay, so this is another example. So, like, almost practically every day, there's another example of the 666 thing. Okay. So the prophets on YouTube are looking for an actual physical chip, but they don't see that Trump's fulfilling the prophecy of 666 by he decides, who he's going to do business with and who he doesn't do business with. Okay, because it says so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Okay, like a metaphorical mark. Okay, like metaphorically, are you um like bowing to Trump's wishes or are you not? Okay. And so Trump actually has picked the vice president of Venezuela to run the country after, they snatched away Maduro, instead of Maria Corina Machado, um, who and the papers always report her as being the Venezuela opposition leader, which makes her sound like a bad person, but she was actually the rightful person voted in. Um, so, anyways, but I think there's some about this vice president that Trump likes. Okay. Um, um, and and I told you that Trump had said that they might have to go back into Venezuela militarily, and I think it was that this vice president doesn't cooperate because she actually said some bad stuff about Trump at the beginning. She was mad about Trump, seizing Maduro, but then I guess she's come around and now she's willing to run the country. Um, but then the other thing that we saw January 15th, Maria Corina Machado, she actually gave her Nobel Peace Prize to Trump, which is just the weirdest thing. Okay, and so people think she might be trying to butter up Trump. Well, I mean, there's also the whole thing where a lot of the Venezuela people are kind of like seeing Trump as a type of messiah for getting rid of Maduro. So you got to remember that too. Um, so I think like she thinks Trump like, or brought peace to Venezuela by getting rid of Maduro. Um, so we got that going on. The other example of 666 was, I don't think I made a slide about this, but okay, so you know how there was those, I think there was 6 of them. They made that video and telling the military people that they don't have to follow the rules if they're telling them to break the law. Um, and so Mark Kelly was one of them. And so they're actually going at so the Trump administration called them the seditious 6, okay? Like they're going against the government, okay? And so Mark Kelly, they demoted him, okay? Um and they're actually going after another one of those 6 people. Um so that is definitely a big picture of 666. Like if you say something bad about Trump, you won't be able to buy and sell. You'll get demoted or fired or whatever. Um, so you got to step out of the traditional teaching about the mark of the beast to see that it's being fulfilled in our day. Okay. And because like it says a mark on their right hand. So Trump's the guy on the right. Okay. So you got to look at it more metaphorically. Okay. So and then it says while they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly. So we had the Gaza 20-point plan, which is the what I'm calling the deal of the millennium, and then the 28-point plan for Ukraine. They're still trying to make those all happen. Okay. On November 17th, the UN actually voted to back Trump's peace plan for Gaza. Okay. And I put in this psalm, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Because Trump's, quote unquote, peace plans actually favor the wicked, okay? Because they were actually going to give they're trying to give Putin some land for this peace plan. And the Gaza plan, they already let go so many of the Palestinian terrorists that were in jail under this plan. So it's not a good plan for Israel. And then Daniel 9:27, we said it, he'll make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he'll put a stop to sacrificing grain offerings. So actually that could say he'll make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, and then for half the week for half of a week, he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So 7 weeks plus 3 days after November 17th, when the UN voted to back Trump's plan, is January 7th. Okay, so you have the 7 weeks, and then the half a week would be the 3 days. Okay, 7 weeks plus 3 days. Okay, because then it goes on to say, on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So on the wing of abominations, so like on the wing of the UN voting to back Trump's plan, we have these people who are who came who are coming to make desolate, so these protesters, okay? And this is all going to happen until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate, okay? But like I said, I think it's both left and right that they're going to fight with each other. They're both bringing desolations and destruction, okay? But God's going to cleanse them out of the land, okay, to make room for his people. So, so that's the deal. They're still trying to I haven't heard much about the Ukraine plan recently, but the Gaza plan, I actually heard that they're planning to move to the second point, which is this it's they're putting in a peace force or something in Gaza, which actually a lot of the nations that they're looking to put on this, well, I don't know if it's the same thing as the board, but a lot of the people that they're talking about are like Israel's enemies. So it's just a lot of crazy making stuff going on. So anyways, and we saw at the end of December that Trump had Mar-a-Lago meetings. On 12/28 he met with Zelensky to talk about the 28-point plan for Ukraine. And then on the 29th he met again with Netanyahu, which I highlighted the 29 because that connects to September 29th. So that was exactly 3 months after they announced this plan. And they were talking about moving to phase 2 of the plan. So definitely very interesting. Anyways, so synchronize your watches. Jesus is coming back soon. So, and then I talked about, how Trump is walking around with this 9/11 hat. 45 to 47. And so we saw that these are slides from the Back to the Future. So we actually see this giant burning 9/11 in, like, the 9 is the heavenly number, 11 is the earthly number. I mean, that could be a picture of the rioters. So I wrote maybe the H stands for Hanukkah because there are some Hanukkah connections. And then, so the Twin Pines Mall. So in Back to the Future, there's 9/11 hidden clues. So 2 trees connect to 9/11. Okay, the 2 towers, 9/11. Okay, the 2 towers fall and then there's one left. Okay, that's definitely a picture. So 9/11 is definitely a picture of, the bad people on the right and the bad people on the left are going to fall, and then Jesus is going to be the big tower left. Jesus and his followers. So the left and the right, could connect to the 2 wings of the eagle. And then we also saw, in Back to the Future, that Einstein's clock changes from 118 to 119. Okay. So, I mean, which could connect to the shutdown ended on Chesvan 18. That was when they had the vote on 11/9 to end the shutdown. So, but there's also a hidden 1335 in Back to the Future. Marty is the 5, and that's when we see the sign changes from the Twin Pines to the Lone Pine Mall. Okay. So, and then what did I write? 1/7/2026 is 1335 after 5/14/22, which is the 74th year of Israel. Um, so, um, so definitely significant. Okay, so 1 year of Trump. So I talked about in my previous videos how I think God's only going to give Trump 1 year. Um, and so we saw that Abraham said, okay, what about Ishmael living before you? Um, but God said, no, but Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. Okay. And so God said in 1 year, so kind of like 1 year after Ishmael rises to prominence, then God was going to have Isaac be born. Okay. And so I wrote in here, Trump is Ishmael, wild donkey, hand against everyone. Okay, he's so fulfilling the prophecies of Ishmael. And then I highlighted verse 19 because one of the dates that I'm looking at is January 19th. Okay, so what's the significance of that? Okay, so that would be after 12 days of rioting. It's the third Christmas. I talked about the third day with Jesus. It's 119, which is a hidden 9/11 number. It's the 365th day of Trump, which that number, we find that number in the scripture. When somebody in Genesis lives 365 years. It's the 12th month of Trump. It's 1 year after the ceasefire that both Biden and Trump were a part of started. That had a lot of 9/11 connections to it, by the way. It January 19th is 11 years after Obama's State of the Union. And then that's when he actually said, let's see if I can find that note really quick. Okay, Obama's State of the Union uses LGBT terms. Okay. So what's interesting about that 11 is that is the number of judgment too, by the way. So kind of interesting that that would be 11 years after Obama's State of the Union. And then January 19th is in the middle of the 119th week of the war in Israel. Okay. So we're seeing a lot of 9/11 connections there. But if that doesn't happen, another date that I'm looking at is January 27th is 11/9 on the Hebrew calendar. Okay. January 27th, which is actually the day. Okay, so on January 27th is actually International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Okay, that was the date that Auschwitz, I can't say that. I can't say that when I'm tired. Auschwitz, the was liberated. What do you call it? During the Holocaust, it was one of the see, I'm tired. I don't remember. It was one of the places that it's one of the concentration camps, Auschwitz. And that was 1945, which is 81 years ago. Okay. If it doesn't happen on the 19th, then January 27th would be the 21st day of the rioting. Which then that would be the day before January 28th, which is the 6th year of the deal of the century. Okay. Which is the 22nd day of the riots. Okay. Which could be significant because we see a lot about the 8th day too in scripture, like circumcision happens on the 8th day, and the number 22 that connects to Trump being the 8th king. It's the 8th day of the festival. So that's a big possibility too. Okay. Like maybe the 27th, 28th, and 29th of January. And then I said, like, maybe if not that, then maybe February 4th. So we just got to wait and see how it plays out. But I'm definitely going to be watching on January 19th, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, too, by the way. But we're moving into the month of the 11th month on the Jewish calendar. Okay, which, I told you the number 11 connects to judgment. Okay. So waiting to see what happens tomorrow, the 18th, see what happens on the 19th. So but we are so close. We're right at the door. So, I mean, we're seeing these things happening. So, hopefully, this video encouraged you to see that, we have been fulfilling prophecy. I'm not going to go over these because I already talked about them in a lot of my videos, but I wanted to keep these because these are really important slides about, like Trump's peace deals on his first term, and then Biden, the stuff that he did against Israel and his ceasefires. And then what Trump has been doing in his second term. And then, okay, so we'll go through these really quick. So a lot of the time frames that we see in Daniel 9 have been fulfilled, like the 70 years, we saw the fulfillment of that. The 70 weeks, there's a bunch of fulfillments of that. The 7 weeks, in the red, I put the new ones that I discovered. So 7 weeks after the deal of the millennium was when the UN voted, to support Trump's, peace deal for Gaza, which was UN Resolution 2803. So that was the 7 weeks. 62 weeks after 11/6/24, when Trump was declared the winner. That I said that before, that it starts on January 13th. So I guess we haven't really seen the fulfillment of that. We'll see what happens. So we got a week to see what happens. Wait, what? Okay, that's not what I was talking about. Like 62 weeks after 11/6. Oh, starts on 113. Okay. Oh, I got confused because I was talking about the 119th week of the war. Okay. So, yeah. So we have 2 reasons why this current week that we're in could be a high watch dates. Okay. And then the times and half a time, I think, connects. The time is Obama, the times is Trump, then Biden, and then half a time is the second term of Trump, because that's when we see the division. Okay. In Daniel 2 it says, "In that you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom." Okay, we're definitely in a divided kingdom right now. Skip that. Skip that. Okay, those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Messiah. Okay, so we got Rachel weeping for her children because they are no more. Okay, I mean, that could be Rachel weeping for the fall of America, or it could be Rachel weeping for the fall of Israel. Okay, but then God says, "There is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children will return to their own territory." Okay, so, and I've had this in all my videos where it says the great city is split into 3 parts. So we don't want to be on the right, we don't want to be on the left, we want to be in the middle, dry land with Messiah, where we're standing by and seeing the salvation of the Lord. Okay, so hopefully you will agree with me that we are in days of darkness, and that we are so close to the end of, the end of days and the return of Messiah. So hopefully this is encouraging to you. I'm wanting it to be encouraging and not discouraging. And hopefully, if you're not convinced enough that you shouldn't protest, pull out your Bible and start reading. And don't listen to a lot of the false prophets on YouTube that said, "Oh, we still got years before Jesus shows up." So have faith, trust that God has a plan and is going to take care of his people, and it hasn't escaped God's notice that we have bad people on the right and bad people on the left. And like I said, I think there's enough guilt to go on both sides. Okay, and we have some civil servants that are violent, and Jesus said that was going to happen in the last days. So, but it also means you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Um, and really, the only person that can fix all this mess is Jesus. So just hang in there. Um, Jesus is at the door. Okay, he's so close. I mean, really, he's just itching to break out, and come save us. Okay, so hang in there. I'm sure Jesus will show up soon and tell you what to do. Um, but definitely keep your eyes on God, and His Word, and don't protest, and just be encouraged. So, thanks so much for listening. God bless. Hopefully, you're encouraged. Take care.